Welcome to Speakernomics, the official podcast of the National Speakers Association. Speakernomics is a podcast where you'll learn to speak, get paid, repeat.
This is Speakernomics, the official podcast of the National Speakers Association. This is the podcast about becoming a better speaker and building a better business. I'm your host, Tom Singer, and today we are going to talk to one of the speakers who is going to be presenting at Activate. Activate is NSA's new online conference that's going to happen on November 5th and 6th, and it is about your digital edge. Whether you're looking to improve your delivery, launch digital products, or build a business where you don't have to leave your home, Activate is the place to be. Activate will give you the ideas, the strategies, and the space so you can take action. And today we're joined by Trevor Perry. Hey, Trevor, welcome to Speakernomics.
Hey, Tom, thanks, and welcome back for the moment, I guess.
Yes, well, thank you. And thank you for being here. We're going to talk a lot about Activate and what you're going to be presenting. But first, for those of you who don't know Trevor Perry, Trevor is a facilitator of dangerous conversations. He challenges audience to break down their walls that hold them back and to be the person that they really want to be. He is a technologist by trade and training, but he is a speaker by passion. He has been speaking for over 30 years. He's been a member of the National Speakers Association for 12 years. And during that time, he served as the Dean of the Speaker Academy for the New York chapter. And most recently, he was the president of the Austin chapter. And he now has that best role that everybody says you can have, immediate past president. Trevor was born in Australia, has lived in the United States for a long time, but recently he has relocated to Canada. So, Trevor, thank you for being a guest here on Speakernomics, and I want to hear all about what you're going to speak about at Activate. But first, let's delve in a little bit to your speaking career. What led you to go from being a technologist to being a speaker?
So as a technologist, I actually trained a lot of people, and a lot of times that takes you to a speaking career. So I started speaking at different technology conferences around the planet, was on various tours, which was really interesting, met some amazing speakers, spoke to a lot of people all around the world. Then I had a personal situation where I left that for about a year and a half. And when I got back, I had a story to tell, and I started doing motivational speaking to technologists. And that morphed into also teaching personal and professional development. So in the techie world, I was that creative guy that was a little weird. And until I started winning speaking medals, they would look at me and point. And then I won a speaking medal. They go, "Oh, hey, he must be good. You better come over and join us." And that's been my career. And now I speak for everybody and enjoy motivational speaking. As you said, my passion is being on a stage and delivering a message that challenges people's current perspectives.
Nice. Well, you're going to be on a digital stage coming up in November for Activate, the new digital online conference that is being launched this year by the National Speakers Association. And you're going to talk about...
And the second tip is that your slides themselves are not the message. You have a message that you're delivering. The slides are one of the tools that allow you to deliver that message. And they're a cheat sheet for you.
Nice. Well, we're going to get into those tips in just a minute. But first of all, I want to talk about how did you become an expert on slide decks? And in full disclosure, I hired Trevor to redo my slide deck about a year ago, and I get a ton of compliments on how just simple and sleek it is. And so, but what put you into this world of actually being aware, watching, and then creating slide decks that are stunning?
Well, first it was the tools. I've had a computer, I had Word 1.0, and I've been able to use Microsoft tools for a very long time. And then I switched to become a Mac guy. I use Mac and Windows. I use PowerPoint, Keynote, Canva, whatever tool you have. I knew how to use the tool. And I discovered that in the world of presenters, they didn't learn the tools. And it was interesting to watch what was up on the slides. Simply because you could do it, it was there. And I struggled with the slides. And I learned very quickly, you never go tell a speaker their slides are crap. You never
Yeah,
go tell them.
we don't like to hear that, especially right after a speech.
Yeah. In fact, one of my friends who I did slides for, we now say that I apparently told him his slides suck. So that works really well. But the idea is that people were overdoing their slides and causing confusion. And there are all these little tips and tricks that I had picked up. And one day I put them together. I started teaching techies how to do slide decks. And that actually ended up being, I teach speaker craft, slide craft, story craft, stage craft, all of these things from that one professional development, if you will. And it wasn't necessarily about teaching the tools, but how to use them to your advantage. And then once I moved into the speaker world, I think it was 2016 or 17 or 18, I was actually on stage at Influence as one of 3 people together doing a slide deck presentation for 20 minutes, which was so much fun.
Nice. Well, let's get into these tips. Your first tip is about being clear, concise, and consistent. What do you mean by that?
Every slide you have in a deck needs to be clear as to what it is exactly that you're about to say. So if you think about all the points that you have, we typically think about bullet points, but what points do you have? What are you trying to say here? And that slide needs to match that completely, clearly. That usually is done by having the smallest amount of stuff on there and allowing you to then tell the story that matches that trigger, if you will. So you could have a picture. A lot of presenters say, I don't need anything. But then other presenters say, well, I need all of these words. And other presenters say, I just need a picture because I will interpret it for them. And that clarity of what it is on your slide is important. Concise means as small as possible. I worked in technology for a while, and a lot of the major software companies had executives who liked to put up a single slide with everything on it that they would talk about for 20 minutes. And I always made a joke that if you have to use a laser pointer, your slides have too much on them.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. I was at a tech conference recently, and a person there had to be 400 words through builds that popped up all over one slide, and nobody was paying attention to the speaker. They were paying attention to the slide because it was so complicated. They were trying to devise what was going on.
And then consistent is all the way through. Your theme should be consistent for the slides that you have. So if you have a section header, every section header should look very similar, should be laid out similar so people know what it is. If you're about to hit a video, there should be a consistent slide to tell you, well, I'm going to do a video now. There should be consistency all the way through. What I like people to do is I like them to do the slide movie by actually, the first thing I do when I get a deck is I run through it really fast in present mode, and I watch the titles. And you'll find the titles change position, they change font pitch, and it's sort of always. But if you're consistent with that, when you switch a slide, the audience doesn't have this disconnect in their head that something switched or changed. So consistency means that the message is received very smoothly, and subconsciously there's no sort of disconcordance.
So when people are thinking about being clear, concise, and consistent, lots of times speakers, especially maybe newer speakers, they want to use like a lot of bullets. All their slides kind of build with more and more topics. Do you believe that people can use a lot of bullets, or should people take each thought and make it its own slide?
I regularly take one slide that has a number of bullets on it. There is a rule that you should only have X amount of bullets on it. And I always laugh because I say the rules are there for you to understand, and then you know when to break them. And so if I have a presenter with a slide that has 3 bullet points in the title, that may become 4 slides. So one for the title to introduce the topic and one for each of the bullet points. And the interesting part is if people are clicking one click to get to the bullet, then the next one, that's 4 clicks. And if you do 4 slides, that's 4 clicks. There's no change except what is showing on the screen. If you try and show all of the words, then the audience is going to read every single word. So whatever you say at the beginning is throwaway. And so even if you did one at a time, they still have to read the word. So I suggest taking each bullet and making it its own slide. That doesn't work for technical presentations or educational presentations. And so there are times when you need the bullets. And if an audience needs to have the summary, then that may be where the original bulleted slide might be as the summary so they can look at it. Because those words are familiar to them, it doesn't take them long to grasp. So there's no, reading everything because they already have it familiar. So there are several different ways. If you're doing a motivational speech, one bullet point is one slide. If you're doing educational technology, especially, you may have more on there, but it's going to change. And again, it also depends on the style of presenting of the individual and the speaker, because one speaker may, want to do something fancy, and they may want to talk for a long time on a topic. And some may want to talk for a long time, but have slides go in the background while they're doing it. All of that, though, could be distracting. So the answer always is it depends, but you've got to think about it as being clear, concise, and consistent.
And you talked earlier about that consistency, about like the font size, the type of font, and are they in the same spot so that when you breeze through it, they're not bouncing all over the place. How often do you see speakers who pay no attention to their fonts and they end up with a deck because they've added a slide one year, they're on an airplane, they add another slide, it worked well, they keep it, and their fonts and their positioning are all over the map? How often do you see that? Because I know you saw it with me.
It's normal, because if you're not thinking about the deck as a working thing, as an entity unto itself, then you're only looking at that one slide and you'll do it the way you're doing it at that minute. And that could be bringing in. I did some slides for one of our most well-known speakers, and it was beautiful. And he told me that one stinking slide will make a stinking deck. And then he took the slide deck and added one of his old slides to it. And it was really interesting because we lost consistency. I mean, a really simple way there, he had cartoons, which are great, but they're not like the rest of it, which was images. So what we did was we created an image of a book and put the cartoon in there, and so it looked like an image. So nice. There's some consistency, and it's a little bit. So just little tricks like that help consistency. But yeah, it's a very normal thing, because speakers learn the slide tools as they go. And when they come back, they don't think about the deck as a whole living thing. They think about what this thing they're going to add is. And yes, it doesn't always look terrible. Just its inconsistency is that weird disconnect that the audience has with what just happened. And while that brain moment is happening, they're not listening to your message or learning.
So your second tip was the slides are not the message. What do we mean by that?
Well, most speakers, it's funny how NSA has a lot of people who set a lot of rules. And I've heard no slides, and I've heard slide for everything. And I've heard, pay for slides, make them up yourself. It's all over the board. What happens is that people want to treat the slide like it's a really important thing. So they'll do fancy stuff to a slide. One of my favorite slide gurus actually pulls out a blow-up sledgehammer, smacks the screen, and clicks a transition which explodes the screen at the time. And what's going to happen there is everybody's going to remember that really cool slide that you did, and they're going to forget what it was you were talking about. And if there's inconsistency all the way through about your slides and the colors and the themes and the fonts, they're going to have struggle with gathering what that message is. So the most important thing is the message. The tools that you have are going to be your slides, your clicker, your style of presenting, the way you stand, and Zoom, for example, is just another tool. And, things like Mentimeter and stuff like that, they're all just tools Slides are just another tool to help you get that message across. What do you want them to go away with? What is your call to action? All essentially should come back to a purpose for your deck, and every slide should match that purpose. But the purpose is coming out of your words that you present, and the tools that you use are just tools, slide decks being one of them.
Nice. So you kind of alluded to animations. I see a lot of speakers who use a lot of animations, both, like you said, banging the thing and things explode on video, or every single slide when it changes, they use a wipe, then they use a fade, then they use a swirl. What are your thoughts on animations overall?
They're really good for Times Square, where I have to get your attention.
Like in New York, standing in Times
Yes.
Square?
Yes, I've got to get your attention. I've got to attract you because of all of these things. But at the worst is when the slides are behind you on stage and they're moving. Now, one of our influencers recently, last year, not this year, had 2 slide screens on either side of the presenter, and there were a lot of moving parts, but the speaker was in the middle and we were watching the speaker. So it depends on where it is and what you want to do. But it was funny, in Sydney, I spoke to the Professional Speakers of Australia, and I said to the lady, I said, no animations. And of course, this is a rule that you need to understand when you can break that rule for whatever reason. And when I do stunning slides, I have a stamp that comes down and stamps stunified on the screen. So I use an animation for that, but it's a trick that I'm using to get their attention and to, point something out. And this lady said, I want to use those animations because they're cool. And I said, for who? And she said, for me. And I went back a year later and she said, you saved me 8 weeks in building a slide deck because I didn't have to put all of those in. They didn't change the message. They didn't have an impact on the message. They actually got in the way. And so moving parts are to attract your attention. Now, there are going to be moving parts. You're going to find a movie that you want to play. And if you want to find a movie that you want to play, there's got to be some moving parts. But get out of the way of the movie and let them see that. And don't talk over the movie unless that's part of the thing. So if you have moving parts, there's got to be a real purposeful reason for doing so. And a lot of people don't have it. They do it because they can. Transitions. Oh, I'll do this transition. And I love when the transitions are not consistent. And I get a lot of decks where we have transitions on, 20 slides and the other 10 were new. So they don't have transitions. And then, as you said, all the different transitions. And every time it transitions differently. And in my full presentation, I actually go through a lot of stupid animations and transitions. And it's funny because it's just what people do. And it doesn't add to the message. It doesn't facilitate anything. It's just noise.
So do you think that people use a lot of animations just simply because some techie somewhere created the animation, built it into PowerPoint, and they can just click a button and add an animation?
On the ribbon in Microsoft PowerPoint, it says transitions, and they click on it. They go, oh, look at all of these cool things. When I first got Keynote and was using Mac, Keynote was a tool created for Steve Jobs and no one else. And then it became something we could all use. But one day they added a flame animation and it was so cool. And to do that, and then I realized, but so what? It didn't change my message. It didn't change the bullet point. It didn't have any support for the story I was telling. So I just took it out.
So are there any other mistakes that speakers make real quick that you want to say, hey, or that you're going to talk about in your presentation? Don't do that.
I'm not sure how many mistakes I'm going to talk about in the presentation, but the number one mistake is learning your tool. I sat on a plane and I watched.
Or not learning your tool, I assume?
Yes, yes. And I sat on a plane and I looked at the guy 2 seats in front of me on the aisle, and he opened up PowerPoint and he created a new one. And the first slide is always the title slide. So he deleted the placeholders, the content placeholders off the title slide and added things to it. And then I get slide decks where people have added things, and instead of taking them out, they've added more things on top. They haven't learned the tools. Another really cool thing that people do is they put an image on and they stretch it so it's out of proportion. and they don't realize. And most people's brains are going, that's not how wide that person's head is. And then they flip people, from one side, and they do a 180-degree flip, horizontal flip. And that's not, the person doesn't look like that unless you're perfectly symmetrical.
Which most of us aren't.
Yes.
Most of us aren't. Yeah.
Yeah. So don't do real people, but do, stock images and models. You can do that for them, but not for real people. Because I think I showed one of the vice presidents, and I showed that, and it wasn't him. So.
So, Trevor, why do you think that people listening should sign up right now for the November 5th and 6th Activate online conference?
Because you said, be a better speaker and build a better business. My story that I'm going to share and the tools that I hope people will understand they can use to build and stunify slide decks are just part of the whole message and the whole story. And it's interesting because I've been using virtual presentations for pretty much 20 years as a techie. So this is sort of a very familiar world to me. I love to be on stage in front of a crowd, and they're in my hands. I've got control, and I can manipulate and give a message that resonates. But we need to be very multifaceted in this world. And being here in Canada, I'm going to be doing a lot more virtual presentations to the US. So I'm back in familiar territory. This is part of our business. We need to learn this better. We need to obviously learn the tools, as I've said. And I believe Activate is going to help a lot of people in understanding this part of our speaking world.
Nice. Well, Trevor, thank you so much for being a guest on Speakernomics.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it.
And thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened. Every single week, the National Speakers Association brings you an episode of Speakernomics, almost for the last 5 years. And the idea is to inspire you to be a better speaker and build a better business. So make sure that you have subscribed to Speakernomics and tell everyone, in all of your speaker friends, let them know that Speakernomics is the place for them to be learning about what's going on. Today, we had a great lesson on how to stunify your slide deck, and hopefully we'll hear more from Trevor at Activate. And then tune in next week for our next episode. We'll see you right back here on Speakernomics, the official podcast of the National Speakers Association.